You're listening to Transcendental Talks Toronto, transcending your mind, elevating your consciousness. Welcome to another episode of Transcendental Talks Toronto, podcast where we connect with each other through discussions about elevating our consciousness from a spiritual perspective. Through conversations with a variety of guests, we will delve into how to balance material and spiritual pursuits, experiences along the spiritual journey, self-improvement, the practice of bhakti yoga or devotion to the divine, challenges, tips, and inspiration, all in a way that is both fun and deeply relevant.
Today's episode focuses on how bhakti can successfully transform one's life. Bhakti means connecting to the divine through loving devotional service. And through relatable and real-life experiences, we'll share how one can integrate bhakti into their life in all circumstances and lead a successful and fulfilling life. I'm Punya Shravana.
And I'm Radha Priya, and we are your hosts at Transcendental Talks Toronto.
Our guest on today's podcast has been practicing bhakti yoga since 2005. She holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto in psychology and also holds a master's degree in special education. Rukmini also works as a behavioral therapist for children with autism and special needs in Toronto. Thank you so much, Rukmini, for joining. We're so excited to have you on Transcendental Talks Toronto.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so just to get started, we'd love to know, of course, we know you joined in 2005, but like, how did it happen? How did you come into the Bhakti tradition? Just a little story about your background.
It kind of gets a bit silly towards the end, but I was going to say that growing up in the Greater Toronto area, we're used to going to different temples growing up. So the Hare Krishna Temple at 243 Avenue Road was one of those. And I'll be honest, we used to go there with our cousins, and it was actually a treat because it was one of the few temples that would serve juice. And so that was the part that stuck out in my head for the longest time, was that, oh, that's the temple that has juice. And the great balcony, we would go, unfortunately, not that it's great, and I don't, recommend any of the children do it now, but we did obviously go upstairs on the balcony and run around. So it was, compared to the other temples that we used to go to when we were younger, it always stood out to me in that way. So throughout the years, I used to live in Scarborough, and now I live back in Scarborough. But before, when I was living in Scarborough, it was an easy place to go to. A few times in a year we would attend, and there was no real connection, but it certainly left an impression of just how different it was and how inclusive it was. I remember just standing in the crowd and someone just pulled me into dance, and that still sticks in my mind. And as we grew up, we moved to Mississauga, and we just happened to come to the ISKCON Toronto Temple just on a whim. My dad had a day off. We decided to come, and it was a week before the large celebration of Janmashtami, one of the big festivals throughout the year. And we happened to meet someone who was sharing some books and scriptures, and we had a conversation, and they said, hey, why don't you come next week? It's this huge festival. It'll be a great time for your whole family. And again, it just happened that my dad was going to have the day off, which wasn't quite often at that time. So we decided to come. And I felt each one of our family members, my dad, my mom, my brothers, we all had kind of a magical moment in that time. I remember sitting in that kirtan, the musical chanting that's happening during the festival. And it really connected. There was something that, it just sparked something inside. And as we were going throughout the whole evening, all of us mentioned, oh, we're just really feeling really nice at this festival. And my youngest brother, Rohan, he didn't have such a magical moment, but he got lost in the crowd.
Oh, no.
As you can imagine, on a huge festival like Janmashtami, it wasn't the greatest thing. And we didn't know many people at that time, obviously. We were just randomly came to a festival. So my mom and I were panicking. He was young, so he wouldn't have known who to go to the front desk or anything like that. And thankfully, the people that we met just a week before at the table, they had caught him and kept him at the front desk, not making any connection that we met them the week before. And so they held on to him, and my mom and myself, my brother, my middle brother, my dad, we're all panicking, trying to figure out where he is. And we come to the front desk, and that lady is holding him. And that makes it sound like she was holding him, like just holding on to him. And again, a conversation struck up. And they were so kind. They were actually having bhakti gatherings in Mississauga, where we lived, and not too far away from us, about a 10-minute drive. And so as we started talking, obviously being very thankful that they held on to my brother at that moment, but it was such a divine intervention in one sense that we got to meet these people who lived in our same area, who were open to having bhakti gatherings at their home. And I guess in one way, the rest is history. We started to join those bhakti gatherings. It was a lot of fun. It was also other families who had children of the same age. And there was something for everybody in there. We were having sanctified food together. We were having gatherings every Friday. So it was something to look forward to at the end of the week. And it certainly fanned the spark that we all felt during that Janmashtami, or that big festival that was happening at the temple, that we all individually felt something happen that day, that it just continued to fan that spark. And those community of devotees, or practitioners, are people who are still part of our family in one sense, because we've known them for so many years and have seen us all grow in our own ways. So I'm so thankful for that. I'm really, really thankful for that bhakti gathering, because otherwise I don't know if I'd be here standing here or sitting here having a conversation with you guys if it weren't for that wonderful gathering and that sense of community that came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the juice.
I'm glad that the juice stayed into the bhakti gatherings too. So that's
exactly.
nice.
It's also amazing to hear how you joined in 2005, which I would think is fairly early in your life. Maybe you were in high school or just started university.
Yeah, actually, I was just in my last year of high school. So I was in grade 12. And I kind of laugh every time. I think that, like, the divine or the supreme really caught me at that moment that I was about to go into university. Yeah. Being a South Asian who's growing up in Canada, you're holding on to two traditions, right? You're holding on to your South Asian culture. And at the same time, you're trying to, create a new identity here in Canada as well. You want to fit in with everybody. So I'll be honest, I really thought, okay, this is my chance. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to get to do all those things that my parents didn't really want me to do. Mm. My parents are never going to watch this. But, I thought about the drinking. I thought about having a boyfriend, all those things, thinking that, okay, I'm going to be able to do that when I'm in university. And I laughed to myself that the Supreme really caught me at that moment and was like, you might want to rethink that. And here's something that you can look into and see if this interests you. And it really did. And so, yeah, right. I was in my last year of grade 12, and right at the beginning, actually, of grade 12 is when I started going to these bhakti gatherings. And I really took onto it. It was certainly, now looking back, it's that missing puzzle piece that was there that needed to fit in, that I didn't know I was seeking spirituality, but when it came, it was like, yeah, I have been looking for this all my life. And it really helped to change clearly how I was going to go into university and pursue my career and my future pursuits there. But yeah, it really caught me at that time, and it really blossomed from there.
That's amazing.
What was a typical day for you when you were in university? I know you would take your courses, do your exams.
Yeah.
And then now you're starting off this practice of bhakti, which is so blissful. How did you integrate the two? And what was the day in the life of Rukmini as a university student?
I'll admit, waking up really, really late. It was an interesting time. I think with going into university, again, as I mentioned, you're trying to forge this identity for yourself. And now I had this added bonus identity of not just a South Asian, not just a Canadian, now actually really trying to identify myself as a spirit soul and someone who's trying to take their spirituality seriously, amongst having, many different interests, or many different vices is one way to put it, but things that are coming at you that you're kind of like, oh, do I want to? And there's also the sense of peer pressure there too, whether it's subtle or not. So I'll say that, university was great, that I did have friends that understood that I was trying to take a spiritual route, and they certainly helped out in that way. And then what quickly became a huge part of my life was the friendships that I also created at the temple. And I'm so fortunate that I had that it also created that bubble, or that cushion, that when those things happened in university, that they were there as well. And it really took up a lot of my social life, and I'll admit, a bit of my studying time. So typically I was, trying to, in grade 12, it was kind of easier to chant, take my meditation beads and chant on them in the form of japa. It was much easier at that time because I could still manage my time. Once we got into university, it was harder. So I tried to have like a set number of rounds that I, was able to chant on my meditation rounds consistently. It wasn't the 16 that I was, imagining and hoping that I'd be able to do, but it was something that I can consistently hold on to. Tried as best at, university as best as I could. Tried to, throw in some bhakti here and there, which I'll admit was most part kirtan or the musical chanting that was always there in my headphones nonstop. And then, yeah, to be very honest, all my free time was spending time with my friends from the temple and doing things together at the temple. At that time, we were helping out with festivals, helping to organize, decorate, organize a schedule. So to be honest, all my weekends were downtown. And for a Mississauga girl, that was quite the distance from my parents, I'll admit. But I took 3 buses to get to the temple, and it was, I laugh that like, usually if I'm taking a bus, I'll walk up Roxborough, and like Roxborough is a fantastic street to walk on with all the beautiful flowers and everything. So it's a great walk up. But my favorite was driving down Avenue Road. So if you're coming south on Avenue Road, there's that little bridge. And then you look up onto the tower and you can see the Hare Krishna sign.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, yes, I'm close to the temple. I don't have to worry about anything else. School, it does not matter in this moment. I'm getting there. And I think the other thing I'll add is that the great thing about university was that I had friends who were around the same age as well that were also going to university. And I mean, shout out to U of T. When you're here in Pueblo, you're not from U of T, but at least Radhapriya and I are. And it was great to have that, shared experience with them. So I never felt out of place, even though I might have felt out of place at university when people would have conversations about things that I wasn't really going to relate to. But at least at Temple, it was a solace of, okay, I have friends who are also going through the same things materially in one sense, that we're going to university, we're all having to deal with the same issues, but at the same time, we can also come together because we are like-minded spiritually as well. So I know you were asking more of a typical day, but that's kind of what it was. It was kind of a typical week that, okay, get through the week, be focused on university, but knowing that the weekend or any free time I had was going to, the temple as much as I could, because it was such a great relief from everything else.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that goes into our kind of next question that, because you're being with those friends from the temple, that you're all growing together. So was that something that actually inspired you to continue practicing? Because I know in university, everybody else is doing their own thing. And then you kind of feel kind of like not an outsider, but you feel like, hey, I can't do a lot of these things that everyone else is doing. Everyone else has other things. So I feel like, did that help you push your bhakti a little bit more if it was a challenge in university?
Yeah, I think what was really nice, again, as I mentioned, like a lot of my friends were kind of in the same age range. We were all in university, different universities as well. But what it brought to my bhakti practice early on, and something that I appreciate to continue to appreciate now, is the diversity. That I don't think I have one friend at that time that was studying psychology. I didn't have one friend who was at U of T Mississauga, even though it's still U of T. U of T Mississauga, we were all doing different things, but that commonality that brought us together. I was just listening to someone the other day talking about harmony versus homogeny, and that homogeny means that we're all going to be the same and we're all going to do the same thing, but there's no spice in it. There's no variety in it. Whereas when there's harmony, you get, and even in music too, with harmony, you hear the different pitches. They all come together in this beautiful symphony, as opposed to them all being separate. So I felt very early on that having people from different backgrounds, even though we're all going through the university experience, we all brought something else to our bhakti practice. And with that, I was inspired by their bhakti, that, okay, I might be interested in something in bhakti, might be something specific, and I see someone else who's also interested in their bhakti, but in a very different way. And I can appreciate that because they bring something to the table, and I can appreciate that, right? And it was a lot of fun. And even as we grew up, many of us, took seriously to our bhakti and, took the shelter or took, guidance from a specific spiritual teacher. And growing up, none of my friends, we each one of us had a different spiritual teacher. So we again brought something else to the table. And there's so much love and appreciation for their spiritual teachers because they've grown up listening to them or learning from them, that through that lineage, you also appreciate also the different spiritual teachers. So I feel very grateful that that was allowed and it was able to happen, because sometimes it doesn't happen, right? We're used to, got to have the homogeny, got to all be the same, got to have the same experiences. And if you don't, then you're an outsider, right? So it was so ingrained in that growing up phase that now it doesn't bother me about the differences. I can see the harm, appreciate that much more.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear just the diverse background experiences that you get in your practice. One of the things that stood out that you mentioned is, we're all in university at one point, and peer pressure is a big thing. And, how did you deal with those situations? Did you have any mentors or guidance that really helped you get through your university years? We do have a lot of people in this podcast who are young, going through university and really looking to figure things out. And I think you could be able to share some really nice, valuable opinion or insight there.
Yeah, I think peer pressure is inevitable. I think that's the first thing, is to accept that it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And it may come in a very, on the TV commercials where it's like, do you want to smoke? It's very deliberate.
Yeah.
And I think with those situations, it's easy to kind of formulate what you want to say.
Right.
But peer pressure can also be that very subtle wave or that subtle current that's happening behind your friend's actions. And I think that's what I felt I had a bit more of a harder time with in that time, because it's not that I didn't love my friends who, again, weren't from the Bhakti tradition, but people who I grew up, went to high school with. There's that sense of nostalgia, or this feeling of like, we've been together for these many years. I want to hold on to that friendship. And there are, they have certainly maybe have supported you in difficult times. They may have, provided, support when you needed it. But then sometimes their actions don't really connect with
Right.
representing. And I find that was the hardest for me, because those relationships really meant something to me. And so I did actually consult, I know in a certain situation, which I can't really delve into now, but where, again, one of my dearest friends, her actions were not meeting what I had expected of her, or at least to hold her to some integrity, or what she held herself to on an integrity basis. And so I was really having a hard time with, should I keep this friendship or not? And I spoke to some of my older Bhakti friends who had already gone through the university process, who maybe, young professionals, and spoke to them about what they thought. And they gave some really good advice. And I'm so glad I had that in my life that I could turn to. And I did actually turn to some of our senior members of our own community, specifically Mother Praharna. She was a pillar of our community, and she really helped me understand. And the reason why I connected with her was, one, she's also a science person. She's also in psychology. So she's one of the few people I know who's in psychology. And so what I tend to do is I gravitate towards people who have that similar background, especially from a scientific perspective. I kind of need things to be presented in a scientific way, even though I hated writing essays and theses when I was younger. I needed someone to present it in that way. And she really did. She took the time to hear me out, level with me, and give me a bhakti type answer, and also providing the practical aspect of it. And not to say that everybody has to flock over to Mother Praharna, but rather really trying to, while you're forging those relationships as you're going up, I think it's really important to forge those older or senior relationships. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to go find an older person, but someone who's a bit experienced, who aligns with you kind of mentally as well, and is also willing to give you answers that are both spiritually based as well as practically based. Because certainly we can all understand that we're a spirit soul. We can understand the spirituality and the philosophy behind it, but what does that mean for me practically, and what I can do? And another great thing about this mentor, or the mentors that I've kept throughout the years, is that they also still gave me the option of making my own decision, right? Sometimes we have, our parents who are spiritual mentors too. They might say, yeah, that's great, but I'm telling you, you need to do this. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I really appreciate about the mentors that I've had throughout the years is that they still gave me the autonomy to be like, look, here are the options. Here are the practical solutions or practical tips that you can keep in mind. At the end of the day, it's your decision. And that really gave me the autonomy to really think on my own as well. And it's something that our founder, Srila Prabhupada, also really focused on, is that, at the end of the day, you have autonomy, and you need to use your own intelligence to make decisions. And so with that peer pressure, coming back to your question, Punya Shravan, is that it's going to happen. I think there are always going to be tests in some way, shape, or form during those formative years of being in university, while you navigate your career and what you want to do with that. And then also having, these great friendships that may have stayed the test of time, who mean a lot to you. But there's going to be times where you're going to have to be tested on, do those relationships stay with you, and do they mean something for you? Recently, I was hearing someone speak about the minivan theory, which suggests that, up until the age of like 22 or so, your whole lives are based around your friendships and your relationships. And again, people are going to mean different things to you. You spend so much time with them. And then, typical timeline is that after 22, you start to get a job, you may get married, you have responsibilities of children. And those friendships that meant so much and were so much part of your life they're not there anymore. And so this person likened your life to a large minivan and said that there are many seats in a minivan. You're the driver, and there are going to be people who are going to be sitting up at the front. And if you've ever been in a minivan, right, like the people who are closest to you can hear, but the people all the way in the third row are people, or the people who kind of get forgotten and you don't hear as often. And so these friendships that we have, certainly when we're like 18, they're probably all squished up in the front seat and are probably fighting over that front seat. But as we continue to grow and build our relationships and build our other relationships like marriage and having children, some of those seats get moved around, or those people get moved on to different seats. It doesn't mean that they still can't be part of your life or your minivan. Doesn't mean that they can't sit in the minivan, but they might be in the third row. Mm. And what I think it allows is that now that I think look back at some of those university friends that, again, love them to pieces. I've known them for my whole life. Were part of my wedding, all those things, but they don't necessarily get my front seat or right. The back seats that are closest to me because their voices are a bit further down. Still love them, still care for them. If they needed me, I'll be there for them. But the seats have changed. So a very long-winded answer. But I feel like that was the part that took the most time outside of university and trying to write my essays and do my coursework, that it was those relationships that really were tested at that time.
I really like that analogy. And I think like even for us too, like there are those relationships and friendships that play different roles in your life, and you need them for certain aspects of your life. And then sometimes you don't need them as much, but they're still there. So I think it's really important to still see them as friends, but maybe not in that certain time in your life where you are right now. So
and I think
it's important.
Yeah. And I think it just gives them a place, because it to let go of a friendship, regardless of what they've done, is hard, right? Even if someone hurt you really, really badly, to let go of that friendship is so hard. And so I feel like this theory just kind of encapsulates that, like, okay, they're close. They're still in that minivan. You still hold them close to your heart, but they just may not be as close to you in that sense that you wish that they would be.
Did you have any experiences with your university friends where perhaps they were inquiring about your practice of bhakti? Like, how would you go about explaining it to them or bringing them closer in a way that, it's a little bit more relatable?
Well, again, very blessed to have friends who were also very spiritual, religious themselves. And that really helped, because then when I said, oh, I don't really eat meat, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. I do, but I also have I have my own restrictions, so I can understand why this is a restriction for you. And I can't say that I ever had friends who really question that. So again, very, very thankful for that. I'll admit my process of explaining or sharing my Krishna, like my bhakti, may not have been the best way, but it was a way. So I kind of laugh about that early time, because I feel like I was a fanatic, kind of that I was just like, bhakti this and bhakti that and that. And not that there's anything wrong with it, but I think I was a bit too fanatical about it at times. And so I was reading quite a bit during my university time. I wish I could go back to how well I was reading at that time to now, but that's a whole other story. But I was reading quite a bit at that time. So aside from reading my university stuff, I was reading some of the scriptures like Nectar of Devotion or Nectar of Instruction. And I remember reading, I believe I was reading Science of Self-Realization at that time. And so I remember sitting with my friend at lunchtime, and I was reading something that I really liked. And so she's like, okay, tell me what you're reading. And so I presented her quite a bit on it. It may have been a bit overwhelming, but my friend was really great about it. She was also sharing things from her faith that connected to, and she's like, wow, this is so cool that, a lot of things are very similar. Going back, I think I would have presented in a bit more of a, with better terms than just reading straight out of the book, just so that there was a bit more understanding. But yeah, my friend was really, really nice with it. But I think that's how I was really trying to share, was whatever I was reading, I was trying to share that. And especially with those friends who I knew I could do that with. It wasn't that I was standing on a podium and trying to do that to everybody, but at least those friends who also had strong faith themselves. I think that was one way that we were able to connect. And, we talk about in Bhakti that we should always be thinking about our practice throughout the day. Whatever we're trying to do, whatever we're doing, we should try to connect it back to the Supreme. And, that was my feeble attempt amidst, essays and exams and studying and forging relationships and not forging relationships and all that stuff, that it was a little bit of, okay, like I'm trying to read, I'm trying to share it, which is a great way, whether you're studying, spiritual material or material outside material, that it's a nice way to to share that, right? Once you listen to something or you hear something and to share it, it helps to put that in your own memory. So in a way, it was helpful that I had a friend that I could do that with. And so
Mhm.
it helped me continue to remember the Supreme throughout the day. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, having those friends that are even open-minded and also, um, like, they have their own faiths too, so they also understand what you're going through, like, although they're doing something differently or they're practicing in another way, but they know that, "Oh, this is what you do and this is what I do." So, even, like, for me too, so I think
Hmm.
that's really cool. And then I wanted to kind of just fast forward a few years.
Good.
Um, and so now you are a mother of a young girl,
I am.
and so I think how do you, I think integrate your own practice your own bhakti while encouraging hers. And so not she's maybe not like it's kind of like your friend, but also she's your daughter. So you're almost like having that teacher role.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that when we fast forward, being a behavior therapist certainly helps with the teaching part, since it's part of my job. I think it was an interesting transition into motherhood. I work with children, so being a mother, or that practical part of being a mother, was like an easy part of it. Being around children, no problem. I have no issue.
Mhm,
But it was the change in my bhakti practice that was a hard one. And after getting married, I was very much involved in the temple. I was doing different services. I was on the management group. And so I was doing quite a lot. And I enjoyed it. It was hard, but I enjoyed it. And knowing that parenthood was coming, was pregnant, I was having a lot of doubts about what's going to happen to my bhakti practice, what's going to happen to the services that I'm involved in. And again, really sought out mentors during that time who've gone through the process or could at least provide some advice and solace during that time. And one of those mentors said, you realize your bhakti tradition, your bhakti, practice is going to change in such a nice way. Like, it's going to be different. Don't be fooled by that. It's going to be different. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to be different, but it's going to blossom into something different. And when you're in it, you're going to notice how great it is. And it'll take you time, and we're all here to support you, but just accept that it's going to be different, and it can be something beautiful in and of itself. And that really helped me through that transition. When I had my daughter Kalindi, it was right before the pandemic. So I think we came to the temple once, and like that was the day before everything shut down. And
mhm,
it was like, especially having a child, you're even more cautious about the pandemic.
mhm,
And so what it allowed in a weird sort of way was really focus in on being a mother, and simultaneously really focus on being someone who still practices bhakti in some way, shape, or form. It evolved. It really did change during that time. So I would say, like, the practical aspects of, okay, chanting your on your japa meditation beads, that changed. I was able to do it a lot easier when I was without a child because I had time and it was mine. Now my time was not mine. And I had to really be creative in the way that I chanted my rounds. And so it might have been, one and a half at some part of time. And then if she was sleeping for a good amount of time, I might get 5, or I might take a nap, depending on what was needed. So it was more of a juggling act after having a child. But at the same time, presenting bhakti to your child who is fresh and is so innocent is another joy in and of itself. And even today, my daughter has a bow and arrow set, and nothing, it's not sharp, it's two cups at the end. And she's been going around the house going, look at me, I can do this. And so I was telling her about the story of Sri Ram, who holds a bow and arrow. And I said, Galandi, you're playing with this bow and arrow. It's so much fun. And she's like, yeah. I said, do you know who else holds a bow and arrow? And right away she said, Sri Ram. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I said, so when you are playing with your bow and arrow and you're, being so strong, you know who you can remember? And she's like, oh, I can remember Sri Ram and his brother Lakshman, because he also holds a bow and arrow. I said, yeah, that's
mhm,
great. And so now she's like, yeah, like Sri Ram gives me strength. And so it's very innocent. It's, without any ego. There's no, sense of, yeah, I guess ego is the best way. It kind of encapsulates what I'm trying to say, that it's so fun to see her experience bhakti in such a fun and exciting way that's not pushing her in any way, but she just finds it fun. And
mhm,
it's a stark difference than when I would share bhakti with people who had, say, come to the temple for the very first time. I'm not going around telling like, if you have a bow and arrow, you can shoot. But it's a different way of sharing bhakti, and it's enjoyable. And just really seeing her face light up about these stories when we're talking to her about different stories from our scriptures. Her face lights up in a different way. She finds it fun. She likes to play the mridanga, which is a small, or for her, it's a small one, but a larger drum that you'll see sometimes in kirtan. And she's always loved that since she was a young baby. And again, just seeing her being excited about bhakti in her own way. Because for me growing up, like I wasn't brought into the movement, right? Or I was not brought up with a bhakti tradition already kind of like tucked in my back pocket, right? So for me, it's a very different experience. And for me, because it came at a great time, it was easy for me to join in or be part of it because it was something that I sought out. And I'm very mindful of the way that I bring up bhakti to my daughter because I want her not to feel that it's imposed on her or that, okay, I grew up with this and so what? This is just my life. And it's not something that I chose. So I want it to be something that she chooses at the end of the day. And I want to present her the best parts of bhakti as well. That it's exciting, it's fun, it's something that will stand the test of time throughout life. It's going to help you throughout the hard times. And so that's kind of my mood when I'm trying to present, bhakti to her. And going back to your original question about how it shifted things for me, as I mentioned, like the practical sides of bhakti certainly changed, of like how I was chanting my rounds or how I was performing different services. Like, to be honest, my services have completely diminished from what I was doing beforehand. But that focus on my daughter and bringing up her bhakti has certainly become my main focus. And in an interesting way, it still continues to grow my own bhakti tradition or my own bhakti practice. So not tradition, but my own bhakti practice that through sharing it with her and seeing her excitement, it also encourages me and excites me that, okay, I need to also do my own. If my cup is not full of bhakti, then how can I pour that to her? So I need to also continue to practice in my own way, whether it's finding, now I might do things a bit more structured so that I can continue to be consistent with it, whether it's reading for 10 minutes or, okay, I need to make sure that I chant my rounds before this time. Whereas before it was like, oh yeah, I can do it easily, no issue. I don't need constraints or structure in my schedule to do so. Now it's like, okay, I do need to put that in so I have a cup that's full that I can give to her.
Nice. Really amazing to hear just how that evolution of, before being married, how you were doing your services, and then now you kind of see it in a different positive way, with your daughter as well. I'm also curious to learn a little bit more about your profession. Mentioned that you work with children and special needs. And I'm just curious how you see how your practice of bhakti helps in your career.
Yeah, so just to give a bit of background, I'm a behavior therapist. I specifically work with children with autism and other intellectual disabilities, ADHD, those kind of things. Again, I use those terms because a lot of people are familiar with them. And I've been doing that for the last 13 years now. So it's also played a significant part of my life in that I've been focused on it for quite some time, especially since I did my master's in it. It really took up a lot of time. But I would say that, the Bhakti tradition, it seeps through all aspects of life. It clearly seeped into, being a mother and now being a working mother. You know, it, one thing is like we do this practice because we want to connect to the Supreme as best as possible, right? We're trying to remember the Supreme throughout the day. But I think another part of our Bhakti tradition is also building up proper character as well, of just being good human beings. And it may not be necessarily an aspect of the Bhakti tradition that we focus in on like very deliberately, but it is certainly occurred because if you're trying to be spiritual, you're also trying to be morally good or trying to present yourself in the best way. And so I would say that the Bhakti tradition or that practice that I've had throughout the years has really helped to align myself when I'm working, in the sense that I work in a field where I'm working with a vulnerable sector, right? Children, especially those with special needs. I'm working with them specifically, so I have to be I have to work with integrity. I have to work ethically throughout. And it also means that I'm going to be dealing with a lot of people that may not be working with integrity or may do things that may not align with me professionally. And so I find that the Bhakti tradition or the Bhakti practice that I follow is very helpful in reminding me that, let's be honest, we've been in situations at corporations or organizations where we want to be petty, right? Like where someone does something and you're like, I want to write the nastiest email I could possibly. And right, if you've seen like those memes, like, to whom it may concern, or like, as
Mhm.
for my last email, we want to write those emails. I did so many times I want to write it. But again, I feel like Bhakti really helps me align myself and go, yes, I may want to write that. Yes, I have those feelings. Yes, someone may have said something that is hurting my ego or my false, prestige of who I think I am. And I'm, at the end of the day, a spirit soul. I am just a small, small little spirit soul who's trying to navigate the world. And at the same time, the other person across the office, in the screen, whatever, who it may be, is also a tiny speck of spirit soul. And they are also trying to navigate the world the best way they can. I may not like the way that they're navigating the world, but at the end of the day, they are also a spirit soul. And so I have to kind of realign myself and go, okay, I may be feeling it this way. It is valid, but here's a chance for me to use my intelligence, to use what I'm reading and what I'm trying to imbibe, not just with the people that I may see at the temple, but also with those people, again, at work, who are also trying in their own way. And they may not be following the same spiritual path that I am, but it does not take away from the fact that they are a spirit soul and I'm a spirit soul, and I have every right and every need to also acknowledge them as a spirit soul and respect them in that same way. So I take my pettiness away from the email and try to interact with them as a human being. And again, I'm using a very like specific example, but it shows up in different ways. And one thing that always resonates with me is, again, Srila Prabhupada, our founder, he spoke about how he wanted us all to be excellent gentlemen and gentlewomen. And that further, emphasizes the point that, yes, we're following the Bhakti tradition. We are going to be practicing those things, like the principles that we have, like the practice of, japa meditation. But at the same time, those things also need to make an impact on us and how we interact with the world, and how we see everyone we meet, regardless of where they are in their spiritual path. And my job at the end of the day is to still be a gentlewoman that our founder, our spiritual teacher, my mentors will be proud of, or at least say, okay, yeah, Rukmini's on the right path. Like she's whatever she's reading and learning, she is taking into practice. And I can't say that I'm perfect at it. I know I'm not, but I know that if I at least strive for it, I'm at least reaching somewhere. And it's only going to further increase my own bhakti bank, in one sense, that even if I'm striving, even if I'm trying, at least I'm trying, at least not doing anything. And I think it's one of the criticisms for anyone who's in a spiritual path, whether it's bhakti or any other traditions, that, do you walk the talk, right? Are you able to actually do what you're reading? And it's sometimes we're seen as hypocritical in that way. And I agree there is some hypocrisy there, but I think it's also because we're all on the same path, and that we're all striving, and we're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. And instead of holding myself down because I've made those mistakes, I'm still going to continue to strive to be a good gentlewoman, or a gentleman for those who identify as a man. That thought that Srila Prabhupada, our founder, had put in is still something that we're holding on to.
Yeah, I think it's really important that the way that others see us, the Bhakti tradition, like what exactly are we doing, and how does it impact others as well? And I think, yeah. And I think, like, also, I don't know, for your career as well, like working with those children, I think it does bring you solace as well, because of the teachings that you've learned and how you see everyone as a spirit soul. And I think that it does help you in a way, whereas others are a little bit, I don't know, discriminatory, and they don't see children in that way. And so I think that Bhakti really helps us with seeing everybody as the same.
Yeah, especially in the mental health field, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of inferiority and superiority, right? Oh, I'm an adult that doesn't have special needs, or I don't have any disabilities. Thus, I can tell other people how they are. And it certainly is a huge aspect of it, of being able to just that simple base rule of, I'm a spirit soul and every other living being is a spirit soul.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever other designations there are, they don't really matter, because that is that base principle, or that base rule that we have, that you are a spirit soul, I'm a spirit soul, and I must treat you with the same respect. that I expect for myself as
Hmm. I know you've talked a little bit about your university career, your profession, being a mother, and I know you've got a lot going on in terms of, everything that you're doing. Is there anything that you do to kind of disconnect to connect, like kind of stepping back a bit to just come back to your practice of bhakti in a more recharged way?
well. I think throughout my practice, it's always been kirtan,
Mm.
just the musical chanting again, that I've always had an inkling towards music throughout my life. And it's what calms things down. You can pick kirtans that are like, there's some that are just so memorable to me that I can put on and I'm like, I feel it. Or if I need something, if I'm in a more prayerful mode, I might pick a different type of kirtan. If I'm just like Krishna or the Supreme, however you reach out to the Supreme, I'm I just can't deal with life right now. I don't know what's happening. I just need to scream or I need to vent, and I don't necessarily have that opportunity right now. I'm gonna belt out, and like if you were to see me on the like usually, I mean my car is like my office, so I'm always like from one end to the other. So if you
Yeah.
ever see me in my car, I will have Kirtan cranked up, and I'll be belting it out as best as I can. I don't have the best voice, but I'll be belting it out. And I have to share one funny story actually. Now that I remember, I was driving in Etobicoke and it was like 10, 11 o'clock at night. I was doing some type of errand. And again, I had my Kirtan out real loud. And I was singing my heart out. And a police car came beside me. And I was just going on. And I turned and I was like, and because like the police car had like their window rolled down and I thought I did something wrong. And I'm scared of authority. And so I looked, oh my goodness. And he was like, no, you're good. Keep singing. I'm like, okay, thank you. I continue to sing on. So yes, kirtan has certainly been that string or that lifeline towards bhakti. That's like an instant connect. Um, I wish I could say that like my previous practice of reading a bit ferociously is still there. And now it's kind of in a bit of a structured way that I make sure that I try to do it every day. But kirtan is always, always, always just any time that I need to, you know, get out of the funk that I'm in. Um, you know, like I said, that kind of prayerful mode or just venting mode that I find it's just such an easy way to connect with the Supreme, because you can have while you're singing, because you're saying the names that are so sacred, it's an instant connect. And once that happens, the heart, it's much easier to open the heart. For some people, they need to be in the temple or they need to like be in front of the deity form to be able to have a prayer. And I find that sometimes a bit overwhelming. But for me, kirtan is like, yeah, done. Like turn it on and I'm good to go. And then, just also, again, bringing a bit of like the mental health part for me, that knowing when's the best time to take a pause and break. Sometimes we think that the best thing to do, whether it's our practice, whether like our spiritual practice, whether it's, work, that the more I chug along, I'll get over it. I'll get over it. No problem. If I just try a bit harder, if I just put in a few more hours into this service or a few more hours to crank up that report, I'll get to the finish line a bit quicker. And you may well, right? Like, and it's something that I'm continuing to learn, but that pause is so critical in going, okay, I know I have 5 reports to write tomorrow. I know I have 5 rounds of japa left. I know I need to do X, Y, Z, but pausing and being able to go, okay, life is a mess. I know it. I can feel it. I need this pause for me to be able to catapult myself even further. Like a catapult, you actually have to pull back before you actually go forward any further. So in the same way, like I need to rest. I need to take a pause. I need to take into account everything that's going in right now. I need to write a list, whatever it may be, to be able to go even further than what I want to do. And as a mom, as a working mom, it's not easy. I'll admit that, but I find that kirtan and those pauses of like, okay, I'm going to take rest at this time, or I'm going to pause what I'm doing so that I can reconnect, do something a bit more meaningful, and then be able to move on to the day tomorrow. Because I know that report, it's going to suck that I don't have it done today, but I need this rest now to be able to do that properly tomorrow.
Yeah, that's really important to take those pauses and breaks. And then I think just navigating not only your life, but what kind of advice would you give to the upcoming generation who are trying to navigate their life, either through school, work, being a parent? Um, yeah.
It's a funny question when someone asks you for advice. You're like, little old me, I can't give advice.
Just tell them, don't play kirtan too loudly in your driving.
Next to a police car.
They might think you're doing something illegal. I would say that, I think through all walks of life, regardless of whether you're going to university, motherhood, anything, having that support system is so, so critical. And the people who you can trust, who you can lean on in even in those dark times when you're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And whatever that shape or form that looks like for you, right? And
Mhm.
having people who aren't going to meet you with judgment, who are going to go, okay, yeah, I'm here to stand by you. I'm here to hold your hand. And really been grateful to have that. And it doesn't come easily. It's not something you can go on a shelf and be like, okay, I want supportive friends, right? It does take time. And I'll admit there were times when I felt I didn't have it at all, right? Even though having a lot of good friends around me, I may not have felt that support. So it is something that takes time to build and create, but it's worthwhile. It's really important to have that because you also need that sounding board when you are making decisions and you have friends who go, I don't know if that's the best decision to make. And that you're willing to hear their advice, right? Again, you have the autonomy to do whatever you please and whatever you choose to do, even in the Bhakti tradition, right? It's not that you can still make wrong turns even if you choose to do so or you try to take a different route. You're always allowed to do that. So really having friends who can call you out in the nicest way possible and also provide support in those dark times because they will come. Those blips in our lives are always going to be there, but those friendships and relationships are really going to carry us through. And of course, those who are also, on the same path as spirituality really does help. It's not that again, friends externally aren't going to be helpful. They are. I mean, there are many that are still part of my life, but those that are also on the same spiritual path really help because they're not just aligning you morally, but they're also aligning you spiritually as well, and they can provide both. So I think that's a huge part is really protecting the relationships that will stay with you for the rest of your life and will hold you accountable when needed. And I think bhakti is a fun thing, but it's a challenging thing as well because um, the way we understand bhakti, there's also a force that's always trying to test us in some way, right? That is question. There are going to be questions. There have been doubts. There have been many doubts in my own practice, even though it's been I don't know how many years I can't calculate from 2005, but whatever it may be. That there will be doubts. There will be questions along the way, and expect them to happen. And to not be fearful of those questions, but rather it gives us an opportunity to dig deeper that if some type of obstacle is showing up in our bhakti practice, this is a time to dig deeper. This is not a time to like crawl out and be like, all right, peace, I'm done with this, but rather, okay, there's an obstacle. And one thing that I learned when I was younger was, two things can be true at the same time. I can love the bhakti tradition, and I might also have questions about it. And they both are valid. It doesn't negate the fact that I like the bhakti tradition. Sometimes we go, okay, something bad's happening. You know what? Done. Finito, I'm done with this. I'm going to go on and try something else. All I ask is that when those obstacles come, that instead of leaving it, dig deeper. Really try to find the one thing we talk about in behavior therapy is trying to find the function of anything. Things superficially may look like something, but what's the deeper function or the meaning behind this? And really honing in on that. And again, if you come to that function and you go, yeah, you know what, I really don't like it. Sure, move on however you need to. But to not be afraid of those obstacles, but see them as opportunities to dig deeper. And then the last thing I'd say is, we're all trying to seek the purposes of our life. I feel like I still am. And not to be afraid of that we may not find some people are very fortunate that they find their purpose of life, right? They get into university, they know what they want to do. They get out of university, they get that job, they're progressing perfectly. And they seem to have their life together and their purpose is, laid out for them. For those of us who are in the Bhakti tradition, it takes a bit of time because we're trying to align. We're all beings in Canada, or at least international listeners too. That we're all living in this world, and that means we might have to pick up a job. We might be fortunate enough that we can take our Bhakti tradition very seriously and do it full time. But regardless, we're still living in this world. And it's never going to be easy navigating what that true purpose is. But that is truly the goal of life, is to figure out that purpose. And it can be multi-layered. You might find that, just figuring out, like for me, my purpose in life is to be a good mom right now. It's to be a good behavior therapist that's able to serve as many people as possible and their families. But then there's that undercurrent of like, what's my spiritual purpose of life? And, that's to connect to the Supreme as best as I can. So it's multi-layered. And again, same thing about obstacles. They're going to come in that pursuit of that purpose, but to not let it go. That it's that force that's always going to try to continue to make us question ourselves and, put doubts in our mind. But our job is to just dig deeper and try to still get to that purpose, still try to, get through it. Last thing I'll say is that I always think of this when, again, you can tell I work with children. There's this game that we play with kids. It's called going on a bear hunt. And for those who are, again, in the Western world may have heard this before. And the rhyme goes is that, like, you're going on a bear hunt, you're looking for a bear, and you come up to a swamp. And it goes like, you can't go over it, you can't go under it. Well, I guess I have to go through it. And I always think of that when I'm thinking of obstacles, like, okay, I might be looking for shortcuts. I might want to go over it. I might want to like dig under, like, go around it, or just, try to circumvent it. But truly the only way to get through things is to go through it. And it sucks. You're going through a disgusting swamp, and, it's not easy, but that is the only way to get through it. So even when we go through obstacles or any issues in our life, the only way to get through it is to really get through it. And it sucks. But as long as you have friends and relationships that are there to hold you, they'll probably help you get out of the swamp too.
That's some really amazing, wise words. I'm sure myself and our viewers will definitely take away just to put into practice. You mentioned that one of the things you're focused on right now, of course, is just being a caring and loving mother. Is there anything that you're thinking about looking ahead, perhaps 10, 20, 30 years out, that you may want to do with respect to your bhakti path?
Oh, wow. I think it's always evolving. I want to do everything. I don't have the time to do it, but I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that.
Yeah.
I think kind of aligning what I already do in, career-wise, really focusing on the education. I mean, I'm already part of or helping out with the education ministry for ISKCON on behalf of Canada. So I really want to delve into that further. I love working with children. I love education. I think it's the cornerstone of any organization, that as long as, the principles are there and the philosophy is there, we need to make sure that everyone is educated about it as well. And how we can do that best for any person. Education is great. There's no one way to do it. And so providing all those opportunities, all those kind of different options for people to feel that they're getting the education or the learning that they need. And so, I think that's one of the big things that I'd like to continue on with if I'm so fortunate to do so. And I think that's the biggest one, is education for now. Again, if you ask me like, oh, would you like to do this? Like, oh yeah, great. I like to do crafts as well. I'm a crafty person, so anything to do with that, big or small, I like to get involved in. So who knows? I keep the options very open.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rukmini, for joining us on Transcendental Talks Toronto. It was such a pleasure to hear about your journey through Bhakti and how it has integrated in so many different aspects of your life. And I'm sure our listeners are going to learn a lot from what you have gone through and can apply it to their lives. And I think it was just really inspiring for not only me, but I think even for Punya Shavana and for our listeners as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for this new venture for Transcendental Talks, and I'm so excited to hear the next one.
Thank you. We definitely have to have you back. And
For sure.
Thank you to all our listeners for joining today. Please stay tuned for future talks with enlivening guests like Rukmini, who will share their experiences as well. Thank you, everyone.